Okay, everybody, hello. It's 2 o'clock, time to start. My name is Jean-Philippe Pellois. I will be giving you a presentation today, and hopefully, as you can see on the screen, the focus is going to be on the review process. So before I begin, let me make sure that you all know that you can use the chat box to ask questions, and Nolan and Justin will be in the background either answering your questions live or waiting for the end of the presentation to address some of your questions. So before we get into it, let me give you a little bit about my background, a little bit of information. I'm associate head of the graduate program in Bio here at A&M. I was previously chair of the recruiting and admission committee. I served for 3 years. I've hired 6 faculty members and staff members out of a pool of 1,000 applicants. I've been on the promotion and tenure committee. I've reviewed 56 tenure packages. I've taught 700 undergrads or so. I've supervised the research of more than 50 undergrads. Oh, I meant more, not less. And I wrote more than 100 recommendation letters. So I feel like I have a bit of experience with it in regard to the recruiting process. And what you're going to hear today is basically the view I've developed over the years and my opinions on the process. So several things that I'd like to highlight today. First is for all of you to understand that your application process is a part of a greater path and a journey that you take. And we'll go over what this particular step involves. I would very much like to give you a reviewer's perspective on the hiring, on the review process, because I think to win any kind of game, you need to know what the rules of the game are. And in many ways, you need to understand what the referee is thinking about. And so that's the reviewer's perspective for you right there. We'll talk about expectations. I'll try to give you a few tips here and there. And we'll talk about the timing and the different phases that are involved in the review process. Okay, so this is the big picture. This is school, K through 12, you go to college, you are obviously all interested in grad school, and that's great. And ultimately, the goal is a successful and enjoyable career. I hope we can all agree. And this is certainly what I think a reviewer is going to be interested in. A reviewer is going to be, in this case for grad school, is going to be a mentor, is going to be an advisor. And they want to train you in grad school so that you become this successful scientist in the future. And this is the stage that you reach when you get your PhD. So application to the graduate program is a step toward this. And it is important to realize that the reviewer is thinking in those terms. What is your trajectory, basically? So to understand this, we need to look at what a PhD really is supposed to be. And I think it's a person who can solve problems creatively. This is a person who can think critically. This is a person that communicates very well. This is a person who will work with others and even lead and inspire others. So this is, I think, some point that are key to a successful and enjoyable career. And this is what we aim to do to prepare you for when we give you a PhD. So in that path, in that journey, you will encounter at some point a preliminary examination. So that's sort of a roadblock or a little hump on the road where the question is, are you on the right path? Are you on the right trajectory? And the application process comes here. Really the question that the reviewer is going to try to answer is, do you have the potential and do you have the right mindset to achieve this target? Of course, along the way, while you are in grad school, you're going to also work with this advisor and they're going to get something out of this, right? And some people may tell you that, they're going to just look into whether you can work for them. But there is more than this. There's really an educational role in that component. So your application overall should reflect what you've done so far and really give insights into what you can accomplish in the future, right? Can you at some point be here? And so this involves curiosity. I think this involves passion for learning. In many ways, when you apply, at the time you apply, you don't need to necessarily know which kind of research you're going to be the most interested in. I think what we all share, though, is a passion for learning. And if you have that passion for learning, you will be excited by all kinds of different projects. So again, how do you communicate this in your application? Some aspects that are hard to demonstrate, but that nonetheless are very important, is your dedication, your work ethics, your perseverance. Are you resilient? Graduate school is something that's going to be challenging. So have you encountered failure? How have you responded to those failures? Have you been perseverant? And it's nothing to be ashamed of to have encountered failure if in the end you've prevailed. Other aspects include communications and interpersonal skills. Again, are you going to work well with others? Are you going to be able to be part of a team? All right, another aspect here that I think is important is the fact that grad school involves a transition. So the way I see it, and that this is my humble opinion, when you are in school, middle school, high school, and so forth, you're very much a spectator. You're sitting in a classroom, you're listening to your teacher, you're supposed to absorb a lot of knowledge. In college, this sort of continues even though you are already starting to grow and transition. But I would still describe this very much as sort of a spectator role. Grad school is very different. You are now becoming a really active participant. You're going to be involved in research projects. You have to be the leader in that project. You have to make decisions. And of course, I think you would all agree that once you have a job in this successful and enjoyable career that we all wish for, you're going to be an active participant, right? Nobody's telling you what to do. You're the one deciding what you're going to do. And so this is really important. So this here transition is a big step. And again, a reviewer will ask, can you make this transition? Is there something in your application dossier that certainly shows that you are capable of this transition? And the best way to prove that you are basically able to do this is to show that you're already an active participant. So this is something that I'd like very much for you to take home today, is going back to the classroom, going back to your respective universities. How can you demonstrate that you are an active participant? Because this is something that we are going to want to see by the time you apply to grad school. All right, so now let's talk about the review process and the different steps. So in this transition from college to grad school, if we look at the fall of the year that would be preceding you joining a graduate school, this is the time when you would start your application. Usually, departments have a deadline of December. You send your dossier and to the university, and it's then dispatched to different departments. And it starts right here. But of course, as I just mentioned, you have to prepare for this well before. Later in that fall semester, your dossier will have been reviewed and you will likely receive an invitation. This invitation is to participate in a visitation weekend. So some people call this a recruiting weekend, a visitation weekend, there are different names, but this is basically you traveling to the place you've applied to and visiting the place, meeting people, and we'll talk about this. An offer can be made to you at two different stages, at this invitation stage or later on during this visitation weekend. In our department, this is the stage at which we make offers, but again, so different departments may do different things. One thing that almost all universities agree upon, though, is this deadline of April 15th. This is the date when you do have to make up your mind and accept one of the several offers that you may receive. So if we look a little bit about this process, there are really two phases. This phase one between the application and the invitation, and then the phase two, which is the visitation weekend. So what does phase one involve? The phase one involves you assembling files that include a statement of purpose, a resume or a curriculum vitae, transcripts, recommendation letters. the people who are going to review those materials are the admission committee of the department. It's usually a small group of faculty members. So that's phase one. Phase two, if you're invited, is the visitation weekend again. And the point here is really to figure out who you are as a person, not just on paper. And this involves the whole department. You will meet current students, you will meet all the faculty members, you will meet staff members, the whole department. Okay, so if we focus on phase one. So here's one thing to, I think, understand from again, a reviewer's perspective. This is the pile of applicants that a reviewer might see. This could be hundreds of dossiers, maybe thousands. So this is a huge list of documents. It's a lot of time, a lot of effort. So usually a first step involves a sort of pre-screening, looking for clues, looking for little highlights in your application that will allow this small admission committee to identify a pile of students who are worth a discussion, where they've triggered an interest. And the reason for this is that there is no way that if the larger the number of applications and the harder it is to review each application in detail. Step two is to then dig a little deeper, really pay attention to the details. This will involve the whole committee, while step one may have involved only one or two committee members. And then invite the number of students who seem to be the best appropriate for the department. Usually this list, again, will the list of students invited will depend on the size of the department, and it will depend on the budget that this department may have to invite people. And you can imagine that this can be quite costly. People are usually flown in. You stay in the location for several days, so hotel nights and so forth. So it is not possible to invite a large number of students. So overall, this first step one, I would say, is this really the largest hurdle you'll meet in being reviewed, in a sense. So from your point of view, what you need to think about is really try to highlight what clues you can introduce in your material. So, and this is why you quite often hear about making your information really, really clear. Again, because in this step number one, people may not have time to look at the details and go dig and find information. You need to make this information as obvious as possible. And we'll talk about what this information can be. One thing to also remember is if we have hundreds of applicants and you're missing some material, you're missing a recommendation letter, for instance. Well, there's not going to be a large effort to try to help you complete this or wait for you, in a sense, because there are so many applications to look through that there is no need to wait for people. So make sure that you stay on top of the process, and that you basically remind the people you ask recommendations letters from to make sure that they send them on time and meet the December deadline. So the documents, right? When we think about the purpose of those documents, and this is something that this workshop will highlight later on, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the statement of purpose is really about your motivation and context. I talked about resilience, I talked about failures, and this is what I mean here by context. This is maybe a good opportunity to talk about the challenges that you've met and highlight, in doing so, your resilience and how you've overcome, so that again you can advertise how you could potentially do that again in the future. The CV has to do with your achievements, your research experience. So in many ways, if you've somehow been successful, you've managed to publish, or you presented a poster, I mean, this is the kind of information that needs to pop out of that document really, really easily, so that reviewers may look for this and find it really fast in that step number one. Your transcripts are about your intellectual abilities, about your preparations. Have you taken the classes that are going to provide a good foundation for the graduate courses you may take, and so forth. Your recommendation letters are extremely important because they now provide someone's opinion about you. So again, your research experience, your teamwork, communication, and in many ways, personally as a reviewer, if I'm looking for clues in a recommendation letter, if a person recommending you says, this is the best undergrad I've ever seen, boom, that's the clue. That's it. That does it for me. Of course, I'm going to dig a little deeper and read the details at some point. But right there, right, this is a hint that this is someone that I'm going to bring into that smaller pile right here. So this is what I mean by clues. And okay, step number 2. This is, so at the end of that step number 2, again, you are going to be invited to the visitation weekend. Offers may or may not be made at this stage. And departments can use the application material to solicit intramural fellowships. So something that you may not have really considered is that, yes, the reviewers are going to be judges, but some reviewers may very well be on your side in the sense that in the background, they are going to work hard at trying to get money potentially to support you through the mechanism of fellowships. So in writing a really good application dossier, you give them weapons, you give them the opportunity, ammunitions, to basically then take that material and use it to apply to their respective colleges and get fellowships. So that's something to remember, that people can work for you at that stage. In terms of the admission committee, something to think about is, so in a way, this is a subjective process. I told you about like a particular clue that I could be looking for. Well, someone else may use a GPA as a threshold. They may think that to do this pre-screening, they're only going to consider high GPAs and not low GPAs. So we could debate whether this is right or not. I think that there is a lot more to a human being than a score. But that being said, again, this is a process, right? It's how do you manage to go from a big pile to a smaller pile that you can actually handle? And the reason behind this is the limited time. So when you apply to college, there were people who were paid to review your application. In grad school, we are not paid to review your application. We are paid to do other things. We are paid to teach. We are paid to do research. We are not really paid to review applications. This is not our professional duties. So we do this because this is part of the system. But what it means is that we may be conflicted in terms of our time commitments. So for step number 1, we may only be able to spend 5 minutes to review a student, or maybe less. Maybe we are also at a coffee shop. Maybe we're distracted and we're not paying attention. Again, I don't recommend that. That's what people do. I'm just saying this is the reality. You don't really know who you're dealing with. In step number 2, when you dig deeper, again, we will now pay closer attention, but we are still limited on time. So people will not study your application file. They will read them, but it's not like they're going to try to get to know you in depth, right? So those time limits are basically dictating the way the review process goes. So if we move on to phase number 2, well, this is really where actually we get to know you. Again, this is about who you are. So we want to know how you get along with people. We want to know if you can talk about your research experience and be enthusiastic. I told you about being passionate about learning. We want to know if you're interested by the research going on in the department, right? So we want to make sure that you will have plenty of options in terms of the research topics that you may choose. Do you have the right attitude? Are you curious? Are you engaged? So this is really about finding a match, though. So this is not only about us getting to know you. This is also about you getting to know us. And you need to remember that you are interviewed as much as you are interviewing the department. So you are quite often in the driver's seat. So I mentioned how the offers can sometimes be made at the invitation stage. In that case, a department is gambling that you will be a good match, and they're trying to make it very attractive to you by already giving you an offer. So in a way, in that particular case, you are totally in the driver's seat, right? You've already been made the offer. If the offer has not been made, then it's a bit of a mix, and it's both you being interviewed and you interviewing the department. So one thing that I'd like to highlight is that this is a chance for you to advertise your qualities. Again, I'll go back to those ideas of curiosity, passion for learning, resilience, teamwork, communication skills. So one thing that I would recommend is that you already think about how you can display those qualities. Maybe you have examples that come to mind. Remember that most of the people you meet will not have read your application at this point. They might actually not know very much about you because they were not part of the admission committee. So they are part of the greater department and they will not have read those applications. They don't know where you're coming from. They don't know the details. So don't be afraid to tell them all about yourself and give them a lot of details. They will want to know about this. Be yourself, show who you are, ask a lot of questions. I mean, this is not a time to be shy. Importantly, when I tell you advertise your qualities, don't pretend to be someone you're not. I mean, that's the other thing, right? I'm not telling you that you need to act a certain way or certainly don't be a phony. Finally, it's okay if you're talking about science and there are certain aspects that you don't know. It's perfectly fine. It's okay to say that you don't know, right? Again, we are looking for somebody who is on a path. We are not looking for someone who already knows everything there is to know on science, right? Okay. So at this stage, after the visitation weekend, once you go home, faculty, current graduate students, staff may all give some feedback about their encounters with you. They will transmit this to the admission committee. The admission committee will reconvene. They will discuss the applications. And honestly, I mean, if you've been invited, it's because people are already pretty interested in you. So there's no reason to believe that things would go poorly. At this stage, it's typically just a validation. And if you've played the game and you were friendly and engaged, everything will go well. At that stage, offers are sent. And if indeed there was some issue, you may be put on a waiting list. It also depends on how many students the department may try to recruit. And at times, they may make the choice of keeping you on a list. So between the visitation weekend, which could happen in January, February, March, it depends, and April 15th, you have a chance to apply to a lot of departments. You can visit as many programs as you'd like. Programs cannot force you to commit. So that's something that's important, even though they can offer a lot of things to you, such as fellowships, as I was mentioning. You are not required to accept those offers at this stage. You don't have to feel pressured. You do not have to commit. You can certainly share your impression and say that you really like the department, but you don't have to sign a form or anything. So my recommendation is that you take your time to consider what's best for you. And that's a combination of the research, the people, the environment, the resources, and so forth. April 15th, though, is a deadline that, again, universities typically have agreed upon, where you now need to accept an offer and commit to a program. And when you commit to a program, expectations are that you're not going to change your mind beyond that date. We ask you to play a fair game and join a program so that people can plan ahead. And sometime in the late summer, or depending on the department, sometimes you can also work during the summer prior to joining the graduate program. You join the graduate program, and that's the overall process. So at this stage, we looked at the path that you're on. We reviewed some of the reviewers' perspectives so that we understand how they can look at the application process from their point of view. Give you some expectations and some tips, and we looked over the timing and the phases of the process. So if you have any questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to answer them.
Hey, JP, so we do have a couple of questions here. You spoke a lot about this idea of active participation. So yes. Can you give us a few examples of what that means in practice? And then how do we best demonstrate that or discuss that in our application materials?
Okay, very good. All right. So when you are in an undergraduate course, for instance, again, you have an instructor. They tell you this is the knowledge that you need to know and that's important to you. They try to convince you that that's the case. You have to memorize some of it, and then you have an exam. Okay, in grad school, you're involved in a research project. And your advisor may tell you, well, we need to find out more about this particular topic, right? You're in a, more likely than not, you're on the edge of what's known and what's not known. So all of a sudden, you have to go look for some information. Nobody's telling you where to find it necessarily. Nobody's telling you what it's going to be. Your advisor may not know that information. You may not find it in a textbook. So that's an example of how you can, you need to be active. Another clear example here is that you may be the one who says, well, that's the information that I need to know. Nobody will tell you, you need to figure this out. You're the one who says, oh, I now realize this is what I need to figure out. And again, this is being fully active. This is having ownership of your project and deciding what you need to do. So to address this question, how can you prove that you were an active participant in as an undergraduate student? So of course, research experience. If you're already involved in a research project, that can help. But again, this is about attitude. So if in your recommendation letters, people simply say, well, this person was involved in this project and they've done a good job, and when they were told to do this, they did it well. You can see how, again, this highlights the fact that when you are given instructions, you can follow them. And that's a great first step. But again, in grad school, you have to make decisions. You have to justify your choices. You have to intellectually decide the path that you want to take. So what if, as an undergraduate student, you already do some of this, right? And what if the person who is your research advisor can attest of this? Ideally, they pay attention to what you do. So, which again means that you have to advertise this. So if some of you participate in group meetings, in research group meetings, ask questions, offer suggestions. You could be saying, well, why don't we try this? I've read a little bit about this. I thought about this new idea. And it may be a good idea or it may not be a good idea. But the simple fact that you're trying is already indicating that you are on that path. You are on this trajectory. So this is just one example. And there are other ways that you could demonstrate this outside of research. In the classroom, you should be the student who's asking questions. You should be the student who's making comments, your suggestions. So these are ideas that you could think about. Other questions?
Yeah, we'll wrap up with one last one, JP. So given the current COVID closure situation, do you have any recommendations for pursuing these active participation activities when everybody is stuck at home, summer internships have been canceled, and a lot of the activities that people would otherwise participate in are not currently available?
So from a teaching point of view, classroom type teaching point of view, I presume a lot of you are taking classes remotely in a Zoom meeting like this one. Well, you can still ask questions, you can still make suggestions, you can still make yourself known. So again, when it comes to recommendation letters, usually there is one that's easy to find. That's going to be your research advisor if you have the chance to do a research project. Then you have a problem. You need two more. So typically what happens is that students go to a course instructor where they've had a good grade. But if you've sat in the classroom quietly, you've never asked a question, yes, you've had good results on your exams, there's just not a lot this person will be able to say about you. So if you ask questions, if you are expressing how puzzled you are, how intrigued something is making you feel, if you bring up a suggestion, all of a sudden, again, you're bringing a material that someone can report in their recommendation letter. So I would still encourage you to be very active in the classroom. Sometimes it's also as simple as just saying that you don't understand, right? If a teacher says to the classroom, okay, guys, have you, is everybody okay with this? And if you're not and you don't say anything, that's a problem. So don't hesitate. And I know that because of peer pressure, students have a tendency to be a little shy and they don't want to say that they don't understand the concept. But if you, on the other hand, say, well, I don't understand the concept, and here is why. Because you told us about this and you told us about that, and I find this confusing. Well, that shows you're thinking, that shows you're active, you're participating, you're engaged. And again, your instructor may very well appreciate this if it's done the right way. So to go back to the original question though, if you're involved in a research project, yes, okay, you may not have access to a lab right now. But how about reading literature? How about thinking about the different directions your project could take? How about an idea of how you could do something more efficiently, or cutting on time or cost? Right there, again, you're showing that you're engaged, you're participating, you're making decisions. And yes, this could be correct or this could be wrong, but don't be afraid. Feel free to share how you think, because again, in grad school, this is what it's going to be all about. Other questions, although we are out of time, but.
Yep, I think we can wrap up with that.
Okay.
Thanks, JP.
Excellent. I hope that everybody enjoyed the presentation, and I look forward to seeing you in the incoming weeks.